Hi, everybody. Welcome back to my Cult Weekly Situation Report. I am Danielle, a scholar of cults, extreme groups, and extremely bad leadership, and author of this book, Uncultured, about growing up in the Children of God religious cult and going into the cult of the U.S. Army. And wow, has it been a big week here and in cults in general, now that we all live in a cult. Do not be alarmed, but I've sort of gouged my hand as I was trying to not fall. So we're going to see how this goes. One of the primary cult baby skills is just, I can do it with a broken heart. Okay, it's go time. Let's go. All right. Today, we are going to talk about some updates in my world with the book Culting of America that I know you all are waiting for, my next book. I'm going to tell you all about that and how that's coming and what's going on and the chapters I've just finished, etc., etc. I think Knitting Cult Puppy would very much like to say hi. You are wet. He's like, why are you wearing a Cruella de Vil scarf again? I did not approve this. Okay, so I'm going to tell you all about that. We're going to talk about the cult of MAGA, the cabinet chaos, RFK, the SecDef nomination, and how many books he's been selling, one Captain Mestenak, and, of course, some healing and finding identities after cults. I'm going to tell you a little more about cult book clubs if you're interested, tips for surviving MAGA family members over the upcoming holidays, and my tutorial about crocheting a wig that I'm going to host soon on TikTok. And finally, we'll look at some things I have knit or crocheted this week. Ready? Okay, so I'm Danielle, a scholar of cults, extreme groups, extremely bad leadership. I got a master's degree from Harvard in organizational psychology during COVID. And this was when I kind of realized I was going to specialize in leadership and culture and organizational psychology just like everyone else, but I was going to look at the bad groups, maybe betting that people have had as many bad groups and bad leaders as good ones. I don't think I will be wrong. So I'm working on this book, The Culting of America, which is where I take my 10 parts of what makes a cult and I show it to you in the military, in cults, in the military, and in kind of our society at large. And some things about America that just make us so culty. My point, as ever, is not to necessarily call anything a cult. The only thing I care about being called a cult, really, is the Children of God cult, and that one everyone agrees on. So I take my extreme stories and experience with extreme groups and help to use that for other people that are never going to get their cult called a cult. But maybe some of this stuff will help them understand the group experiences that they've been through. And trust me, you'll just see it in a whole different way. Okay, so I've been writing this book for 1.5 years now. Before I ever even started my YouTube and Patreon channels or realized that we were going to call the brand Knitting Cult Lady, I started writing this book called The Culting of America. And I started it in January of last year. So it's been almost 2 years now. I have been sort of crowdsourcing this book. In fact, I've been writing it in a very fun way, mostly with my TikTok and Instagram audiences, where I write parts, I make videos reading them out loud while knitting, and then people give me feedback, give me their examples. A lot of it, too, is I've learned I'm such a verbal processor. So I spend a month kind of on each chapter, and that month is, this month was exploitation of labor, but I did it really quickly. So we didn't actually spend a whole month talking about it, but cults are always about labor. So I'm always sort of talking about it and engaging in this conversation. And my knitting cult chat lives that I do every day, I go live on TikTok and Instagram and sign books to send to people. Because it's a hell of a time to be an expert on the bad guy, and we're going to get to how much the SecDef is ridiculous in a little bit. Okay, that's Secretary of Defense nomination. We'll get there, Daniela. All right, so met with the book team to get a more finalized publication date. I am self-publishing. I am at this really amazing publisher called Otterpine, which is run by a former Navy officer woman who also crochets and does fiber arts and salsa dances. And one of the co-writers who helped me with Uncultured really polish my writing, Amy Reed, she's the editor at this self-publisher. So she, once again, if you liked Uncultured, if you liked my video book Un-American, which you can find all the links to below, you like Amy's writing. And so she's editing and helping me get this done. At a pretty high level, because we're trying to make a book that's of like equal quality as Uncultured, and we are trying to get it done. So we're hoping that the book is going to launch next November, early next November, in time for holidays, etc. I know that's still a whole nother year, and I know people want this book so fast, but this is faster than if we did it with a traditional publisher. My deadline now needs to be finished by March, me and Amy. We need to have the text all finished. So a couple things. One is I'm already through chapter 9 of 13, so I'm feeling good right now. And I need to just write the chapters and get them all done. So I'm working on it a little bit every day. And then I come read the excerpts to people on TikTok, and then things shape up. It's fantastic. I've told the social media audiences that they're all going to get writing credits on this next book. So I've just finished chapter 9, Exploitation of Labor. But I started doing it. I've been moving very slowly, taking a whole month to write each chapter for a long time, obviously more than that, because I didn't have childcare for a while, and because I'm just working as fast as one can do 13 research papers in a row by themselves. And so now that we are trying to hit a pretty significant deadline, I've decided I don't have to do it all by myself. So I am bringing in a research assistant. Okay, so I'm bringing in someone who's a friend, who's a fellow cult survivor, who's going to be very good on this research project. And she's going to help me add, all the smart things that everyone else says to shore up the book. I think it's going to be interesting and fun. I really like writing my books with other people and paying them very well. Before I get to that, those of you that are impatient for the books, I do read snippets on TikTok. Make sure you come join us there, on Instagram. On my Patreon, though, that is one of the benefits of being a Patreon subscriber. It's the $5.99 a month level. It's all of my content together, curated right there. The 2 different podcasts, Cults and the Culting of America and Hey White Woman, where we are deconstructing white supremacy like the cult that it is, while just knitting and crocheting together, me and White Woman Whisperer. And then me and Scott Lloyd on Cults and Culting of America, who interview really interesting people and talk about their area of expertise plus cults. Kind of like my channels, but with interesting guests. Today they're giving me a hard time because we published our episode on AA. So this one, the hard time's coming from Threads, and people get all mad at me. And they're like, you just see cults in everything. And I'm like, I have 2 questions. Do we tell anyone else they're too much of an expert in their field, or is that just the cult people? And also, do we get mad at doctors that are studying what causes cancer because they're not the same doctors that study what cures cancer? I mean, now that I say that out loud, I bet people probably do. But anyways, this is called the Cassandra complex, when we get mad at the person who talks about the bad guy. Okay, I might be rambling. All right. So my talent manager and I are about to launch a crowdfunding campaign because publishing a good book, especially in a short timeline, comes with a pretty nice timeline, or a pretty nice price tag, which of course, part of which is because we want to pay the people that are making this book real, as Knitting Cult Baby says, a really good living wage, fair for what they're doing, which is a lot. I never set on huge projects like books by myself, which I, of course, think makes them better because, teamwork. All right, so more to follow on that, but we are going to be doing fun things because since I'm self-publishing the book, I can do all kinds of fun things. I know we're going to have a kind of very low donation level that is going to get you a free digital book when it's ready. Probably all of these will be a little bit early, if you contribute to the crowdsourcing campaign right now. I'm going to have a slightly higher than book cost level where you get the book, a custom pair of knitting needles, and like a 12-month membership to our monthly Stitch and Bitch sesh where we just talk about basically anything and do crafts together. And it's very fun. That is my higher level of the Patreon, which also comes with the 2 book clubs and all of the content. Okay, so definitely gonna do some fun things too. Like some people that can donate a lot, we're gonna do some cult coats. So more to follow on all of that. If you have any idea of a level of contribution and fun, lovely, whimsical stuff, let us know in the comments. I'm also putting together a culty knitting patterns book. And so for sure, we're going to have one level that gets some like special knitting patterns that's just for that level. We're going to do the culty knitting patterns book as a PDF. I'm doing 5 patterns that I've created plus 2 bonus patterns. And it's also going to have links to videos on like how to crochet, how to knit. And that is going to be, I'm going to do it a PDF so that we can keep adding more because I've counted and I've made up like 45 different things already, which I suppose is what happens when you craft for 12 hours a day. It's very fun. Most of my stuff comes from thrift stores. It's a lot of fun scavenging. So anyways, I'm looking to be excited to share that one also. And eventually I think when I get all the patterns done, we'll make it into like a coffee table book that also has whimsical stories and tidbits about cults, plus, knitting stuff. Awesome. Okay, what we all really want to talk about now, the cabinet chaos. The interesting, crazy, intense cultiness that is going to be the rest of the next 4 years of our lives, y'all. It's funny, I never thought I was going to say I don't have a crystal ball so often again in my professional career. It's something I used to have to say as an intelligence officer all the time to the pilots I briefed. They'd be like, well, what's going to happen? Sir, not sir. They called me ma'am most of the time. I don't have a crystal ball. However, I don't know what's going to happen in the country, right? Like we are, the cult of MAGA won this one, right? So we are all kind of going to live in it for a while. I don't know what's going to happen. I do think like every check and balance in America is going to be tested. I have a little bit of hope, which is the cabinet chaos. Why is this giving me hope? Let's get into it. So you have RFK, who is going to be in charge of healthcare, right? Like, anti-vaxxer, super culty in his own right. We'll talk about why that's not the great thing that Donald Trump thinks it is. Of course, you got Elon Musk in his Department of Government Efficiency. So the chapter on exploitation of labor that I just wrote, we open it up with a vignette about Elon Musk taking over Twitter and just like demanding more work hours of people. All of a sudden people are sleeping in their offices and like burnout is a sign of honor. And I end the little vignette with like him already recruiting for this. Trump's not even in office. He's already recruiting and he's telling people don't even apply if you're not willing to work 80 plus hours a week, right? Exploitation of labor. We've got... Okay, let's stay on RFK Jr. for a little bit. He's doing all this food policing already. I think it's going to be pretty funny. Some people think he might try to go after fast food, but like the president's favorite food is McDonald's. Anyway, it's interesting if you know how like cult leaders are policing food all of the time. All of the time. Just read in Dr. Margaret Singer's book, Cults in Our Midst, which we're doing right now in Cult Theory Book Club, about how like children in cults are almost always hungry. And I have maybe never resonated with anything more. I write about that in Uncultured, how I'm sort of always hungry. But, you know, it's also interesting because it's like his followers want this. His followers want him to tell them exactly what to do. People join cults in times of social turmoil because the world is frightening right now. I just watched this documentary on online shopping last night, which had Dr. Mara Einstein in it. Hey, saw you, girl. And it's terrifying. It is terrifying how commercialism is just destroying our planet, and I don't know that anything can stop it. Unless the entire globe chooses to stop it, like, together, which is obviously probably not going to happen. Interesting little example of ends justifies the means mentality here with RFK's people suddenly supporting Trump, right? So this is from Reddit. But remember, it's not a vote for Trump only. It's a vote for the good, reputable men and women who have rallied around him. The team of leaders who have given up everything to side with Trump for the good of the country and for their love of the people in it. They only need one thing from us, our vote. So please, please vote for Donald Trump, for RFK, for our future, for the future generations that shouldn't have to live with the repercussions of another corrupt and inept presidential term. Please, no matter what state you are in, vote for Trump. It's the only way to get Bobby into a position of power. And we need him now more than ever for our future as a nation. Because if Trump doesn't win and we can't begin to course correct, I really don't know if we'll ever have this chance again. The cultiness of the language is just so good. How it sounds like a sermon. Impassioned. Desperate, persecution, apocalypse. It's all going to be the end. And also, ends justifies the means mentality, right? These are people, this is the party of family values who knows that Cult 45 is a despicable human being, is an assaulter, is a just all of the worst things, all of the worst parts of humanity rolled into one man, if you will. But are we not entertained? Linda McMahon as the Secretary of Education, just the ridiculousness of all of this. The Secretary of Defense. Oh, I know what his name is, but I just like calling him Hogsworth for my own benefit. So, Trump's nominee for the Secretary of Defense. In addition to having at least 3 Nazi-leaning tattoos that we know of, comes out strongly against women in combat. Now, this is fascinating for me, because did you know there is already a woman who was one of the first women on a deliberate ground combat team in U.S. Army history, part of help taking down the combat ban, which also led to taking down the trans ban, led to all of the different special schools and branches of the military being open to women. Like, she's already out there, and she already wrote a high-quality, international, critically acclaimed book about it. And it was me. It's called Uncultured. And man, have I been selling lots of signed books on TikTok and Instagram ever since this silliness. Because the interesting thing is, like, we already answered this question. Y'all are trying so hard to go back. But, like, we answered this question, and we answered it with a quickness once we figured out the right question. Because the thing was, for 243 years, Americans, military people, men, had been saying, are women good enough to be men? and then answering their own question without letting the women even try. But this is all presupposing that men do combat the best way. They call the male standards the raw standards, and these are arbitrarily chosen standards anyway that have almost nothing to do with the art of warfare and being ready for it, especially in a modern day. Anyway, we proved with the quickness, 3 months after starting these experiments, that I believe they intended to fail. They intended to prove the pseudoscience that they believed wrong. Instead, within 3 months, they had mandated that all deliberate operations will have women on them. And since then, they started to open everything. Because what changed, women have always been in ground combat in U.S. military history, going all the way back to the Revolutionary War. What changed is the military was always able to say, whoops, it was incidental. They were just there. They were an infantry. They were a supply clerk. It's Jessica Lynch's fault for not being prepared as a soldier. Oh, we didn't let her get prepared because she was a woman? Nah, everyone's an infantryman, but we just don't let them go to the training because they're little ladies. Once we started on this, they realized very fast you can't send undertrained, under-armored soldiers into deliberate ground combat missions, etc. So, very quickly, while we were still deployed, I was First Lieutenant Mestenek, and they opened up the CSTs, a cultural support team. They opened up a special forces-esque selection process for women who wanted to be part of this. And I had good friends go through it and go deploy with Rangers and Special Forces, etc. Super proud of this, though definitely had to fight for recognition when I got around to, I want to write a book and I want to talk about this thing that we did. It wasn't even still being talked about that much at that point in 2008. Now, the infantry is full of women. Combat Arms is full of women. And the other day, someone was in my live and she said, I'm in the infantry now and trust me, we all know your name. And I was like, I'm proud of myself. I did that. I went to Fort Knox and asked them what I was allowed to say. I'm the one that wouldn't shut up, even though people were telling me that I was making too big of a deal over what we did. And I'm the one that went and wrote a book about it and got it published in the mass market. And I was part of breaking this very important glass ceiling. And since then, Mr. Pete Hogsworth, everyone has been collecting data, numbers, and qualitative stories on the things that women bring to ground combat. I'm going to read y'all a little story from Uncultured. Okay, so we're in this Afghan village on a patrol. I am the only woman on this team with 25 American soldiers and about 15 Afghan soldiers. Stop, I said with a certainty I didn't know I had. As we approached the village, the men had been noticing things looked funny. I had been having like a weird spidey sense. Suddenly figured it out. Doubt crept in. What if I wasn't supposed to be doing anything, noticing anything, saying anything? What if no one wanted to hear my thoughts? I was just there to engage with the women and children, the ones blatantly absent. I shifted my weight and stared ahead at the near endless miles of sand, steeling myself for the criticism and ridicule as everyone looked my way. I knew I'd never live it down if I was wrong. There are no children, I told First Lieutenant Wang, anywhere. I gestured around, stared at the raised eyebrows on the lieutenant, trying to read his expression. I hoped he didn't think I was trying to step on his authority. But then both of his eyes widened. Everyone hit the ground, he yelled. That was the moment I knew for sure that I wasn't wrong. The men hadn't seen it, at least not all of it. The experienced group of airborne, Ranger-qualified pathfinders and explosive device experts, men who did this day and night without rest, men who'd been primed, who had already noticed several other indicators that could have been nothing, or could have been an ambush waiting to take 10 more of us to early graves. The children were the last piece of the puzzle, an obvious sign, once combined with everything else, and one I always briefed troops about in my day job. It had only ever been in theory before. But now, the reality of their complete and utter absence hit me with fear that left my hands and feet tingling. It would take 20 minutes for the explosive device technicians to verify the bomb, in a spot they'd identified about 100 yards in front of our group. It looked pretty small, but still deadly. We wouldn't continue on the mission. Clearly, drinking tea with these village leaders would have to wait. We'd call in the suspected IED grid marker, and base operations would send a team over to deal with it more officially. By later that afternoon, the children would probably be back outside. We'd never find out if it had been a terrorist who had booby-trapped the village, or if one of the men we had tea with last time we were here had been paid to lay the bomb. Maybe it was someone who'd had his children's lives threatened if he didn't cooperate. The Afghan villagers may have been ambivalent about the American soldiers in their country. They may have wavered between supporting us or helping clothe and feed the terrorists who tried to take our lives, depending on whose mission they related to more. But one fact didn't change. They loved their children as much as any other parents anywhere in the world. If they know something is wrong, they won't let the children out to play. I'd briefed this to teams of soldiers going out beyond the wire. We called them indicators, signs of danger. I realized why I'd noticed this indicator. I loved seeing the little girls. I felt flattered they could always tell I was a woman, even in my full combat kit. The ill-fitting body armor, helmet, and bulletproof eye protection, loaded M4 rifle, and 6 extra 30-round magazine clips, clipped to my load-bearing vest, gloved and booted. And as much as I stood out to them, they stood out to me too. Most soldiers on my team would try to win their favor with Beanie Babies and candy. The guys talked about the joys of making them smile, though I'm sure our commanders didn't mind whatever positive influence may have been gained with their parents by the gesture. But I saw more than kids happy to see me. Happy to see American saviors. I saw a version of the childhood I'd survived. Hungry faces wearing brave smiles, calloused bare feet, and the fear hiding behind their eyes. That day on the sand, I didn't see girls laden with too much responsibility, along with the toddlers and babies they struggled to balance. That day on the sand, I saw their absence instead. I can't say for sure what anyone else experienced. All I know is that when we were walking back to the helicopters, mission aborted, but no casualties this time. We had just lost 10 of our people. First Lieutenant Wang said to me, "Man, I love having you girls on the team. You notice the silliest things." But he didn't say it like it was silly. His face didn't crack a smile at all. Just a silent nod and he was off. A sign from a quiet professional. Keep doing good work. You're a valued part of the team. On the birds taking us back to relative safety, all I could think of were the many people who'd said to me, "Daniela, I'm so glad you weren't there the day John died. But what if I had been there? What if any of us had been there? The women our country so strongly believed needed to be kept out of harm's way. What if, as John had pointed out, our being so different, with such divergent life experiences, and all the silly little things we notice, was the entire point? What if we could save lives just by being women? What if I could have saved him?" So, just one little example of what women can bring to the table, and what we found out, that again, we'd been asking the wrong question. And what we learned is that when both men and women are trying to take your life, it makes sense to have both men and women on your team fighting back. So, if Hogsworth wants to weaken Donald Trump's military, maybe that's not the worst thing ever. But, however, this is kind of pretty serious, of course, because the other thing that banning people from combat did was increase the sexual violence in the U.S. military. What a military does is program people to conduct violence on behalf of state. Then you turn around and you tell those people that 10 to 20% of them just aren't as good as you. That is predictably going to lead to violence, and most likely sexual violence. It's ironic that taking down the combat ban against women made us safer. And as I always say, when someone truly can't do something, you don't have to make regulations and legislations to keep them from doing it. Anyway, I do think the military, which is already down on recruitment this year, especially of women, and Gen Z is just not joining the U.S. military in rates that they have done before, because how bad the culture is getting to be very, very known. And I hope that I was a small part of contributing to that. This is the first generation where military veterans like me and Mr. Knitting Cult Lady have warned their children away from going into the military rather than encouraging them to join. And in the midst of all that, you want to take out 20% of your force, sir? Interesting tactic. But as much as I so looked forward to positive changes in the military with Kamala Harris as commander-in-chief, because, you know, none of those generals were going to have the shrivelly white balls to look her in the face and say they couldn't control soldiers' actions on their bases, their areas of operation. Moving on from the Secretary of Defense, we have that little fun part about Matt Gaetz being nominated as Attorney General. I mean, I guess there is a secret cabal of pedos running the country after all. One of them was almost the Attorney General. And so it kind of seems like some of this is for show. Like, he's just going so ridiculous. I mean, Dr. Oz, like, is Dr. Phil going to be next? You know, I mean, this is just bonkers. But what's interesting is he's putting so many narcissists at the top and people that like to compete for attention that there's almost no way it's going to work out very well. So when you have like the charismatic leader-led cult, there's kind of two ways it can go. You can be surrounded with like good bureaucrats, not necessarily good people, but good bureaucrats, successful, experienced bureaucrats who begin to lay down laws and rules and regulations, write things down, record things, build institutional knowledge, build a bureaucracy, which is the opposite of charismatic leadership, which is very, what's the word? Back and forth with the wind. So you can have that. It's called routinization. Mormons is usually the textbook example for this. And people say you go from a cult through routinization, then you're not a cult. Mormons are the textbook example. Okay. So, or you can have just leaders around you that have helped you build the organization up and have affirmed you in what you've been doing this whole time, Trump. But then they're also wanting a share of power and limelight for themselves, and cult leaders will not have that. And so they're like firing and removing people all the time. I talked this week about how it's very common for the leader of Children of God to be doing that. In fact, now I think about it, the only two I've never heard of him firing of his big top leaders were my father and grandfather, which were the two that handled the money. So, there's that. And then, of course, we have Tulsi Gabbard's cult. And I am going to read this article about what it is. Okay, this is MSN, The Daily Beast, and it says, Tulsi Gabbard's ties to cult could cost her her intel job. Unlikely. In the wake of President-elect Donald Trump's decision to appoint ex-Democratic Rep. Tulsi Gabbard as his Director of National Intelligence, reports have resurfaced her ties to a religious sect described as a cult, a connection that has the potential to throw her nomination, which requires Senate confirmation, into jeopardy. Let's also remember that she was basically an asset for the Russians, right? Okay. Gabbard became the first American Samoan and practicing Hindu in Congress when she joined the House as the representative for Hawaii's 2nd Congressional District in 2013. And she's also, I think, a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserves. And she reportedly met her husband, Abraham Williams, just a year before when he volunteered to shoot a video for her campaign. In addition to bonding over a love of surfing, the Daily Mail reported the couple also was mutually connected to the Science of Identity Foundation, a group with a history of antagonism toward LGBTQ people, women, and Muslims. The group's leader, Chris Butler, is heralded by members as a deity, a god, in his own right. The SIF, described as an alt-right branch of Hare Krishna, also a cult, has reportedly developed thousands of followers across Hawaii, Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asia, with Butler being heralded as an extension of God, because they always are. I was raised to believe Chris Butler was God's voice on earth, and if you questioned him or offended him in any way, you were effectively offending God, said a former SIF member in a 2017 Medium post. Gabbard's aunt, Dr. Carolyn Sinavayana Gabbard, also did not speak highly of the organization or her niece's involvement. Quote, once again, I find my niece's apparent penchant for parroting extremist toadies such as Tucker Carlson and vile strongmen such as Vladimir Putin to be problematic and deeply troubling. She said, it gives me no pleasure to note that Tulsi's single governing principle seems to be expedience, which is in effect no principle at all. Caroline also alleged that Gabbard's 2020 presidential bid was actually the result of Butler's pursuit of political influence, with Gabbard openly praising Butler as her guru. And cults are always out for political power, and they are definitely getting it in today's America. That's a quote from our unpublished Culting of America. Amid open backlash against her nomination for the coveted intelligence role, the reports of her ties to the fringe religious sect could result in more pushback against Gabbard, especially after she was previously connected to a Russian spy. But also, Amy Coney Barrett is in another cult, and she's on the Supreme Court, so it's unlikely that there will be pushback. John Bolton, also problematic, who served as Trump's national security advisor from April 2018 to September 2019, called Gabbard the worst cabinet-level appointment in history in a CNN interview. That is, until Bolton heard about Matt Gaetz being nominated as Attorney General. Now we are going to see whether the American Senate can stand up and reject two people who are totally unqualified, unfit professionally, and really lacking in the moral character you need to hold these jobs, said Bolton. I think this vote should be 100-0 against both of them. In a quote to Politico, a senior former intelligence official called Gabbard's nomination a left turn and off the bridge. And of course, this is part of why we know we're in a cult now, because we know the vote is not going to be 0-0. We know that. And I also made a video this week about how it's not unusual for cult leaders to go into hiding, which is what Tulsi Gabbard's cult leader, Chris Butler, has been doing for a while now. All right. The good news, not the good news. Again, I do think all of our checks and balances are going to be tested. But the good news is that the cult of America has gone through routinization as well. There is a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of stuff run by civil servants. I think so many of Trump's party boy appointments are going to get into these roles and realize, like he did the first time as president, surprised that he actually was expected to work like a hard full-time job. And I think that's going to be very interesting. Okay, and now I promised to talk a little bit about healing and finding identity after the cult. I was asked specifically this week about how I did it and how Mr. Knitting Cult Lady did it. So, for me, it was kind of a process of, I left the cult when I was 15, and I just put myself back into my own high control group by forcing myself to be a super student after a lifetime of no education and working a bunch of jobs so that I could have money and survive. Then straight into college where I did the same thing, graduated as valedictorian, right? It was like that level of focused. and then went into the military, which again required almost 2 years of focus till I was just like working a normal military job. Spent 6.5 years in the military, deployed twice, left the military as a captain. And in between that, as we read about in Uncultured, had kind of an emotional breakdown, which would later be followed by some physical breakdown. But it's really that I didn't choose to start deconstructing the cult. I just chose that I wanted to live. At a very dark time of my life, I wanted to live. And I had begun to realize that if being a shiny army captain after what I came through, didn't fix me, then there was no amount of success that I was going to achieve. So I decided I need to get into it all and study other people and learn how to understand what I'd been through, groups, read. Since I've been 22 years old, I've been reading every cult memoir and every cult book that I can find, and a lot of that helps because you start to realize your story is not unique. There are patterns here. There's stuff that can explain, and there really is, I think, 3 stages of leaving a cult. There's the crack and the brainwashing, and the physically and mentally leaving a cult. And then there is the decade of deconstruction. This starts when you start it. I left the cult at 15. I didn't start deconstructing until almost 25, right? You just think you can put it all behind you, but there's no way we can do that. There's no model where that is true. And if we don't deal with it, we pass down a lot of generational trauma to our kids. And that was another reason that, yes. Sorry about that strange yes. I was on hold with the IRS for part of that. Okay. What was I saying? It was a lot of reading. Eventually it turned into writing. It turned into the idea to tell my own story. But one of the things I tell people, there's a big difference in deconstructing and making your experience or cults your life, right? But you still have to learn to tell your story. This is one of the things that veterans struggle with when they get out of the military, is learning how to tell the story and how to talk about it, not in army language, in civilianese, that other people can understand. This is why another reason that I worked with a team and still work with teams to write my book, so we can make sure we're communicating everything in a way that is effective for everyone, not just people who have been in the cult or been in the army. I did also finish a chapter about language recently, and we talked specifically about how language is it's the first thing we're willing to change about ourselves and the last thing that sticks with us. And it can be hard to learn how to talk about your cult experience without the cult language. And then once you take off the cult language, it can be really hard to be back around family or friends or peers from the cult who are still using the cult language, right? Because usually the cult language is pretty dishonest about what we were going through. More on that on another time when I'm not so tired. If you're wondering, why did I skip the us versus them chapter? Why did I go straight from language to exploitation of labor? Well, that's because I realized maybe I'm not the right person to write that chapter. By the time you get to this point, we know what us versus them in a cult is. And of course, we'll have some examples in the chapter. But mostly it's a chapter about us versus them in America and really what makes America so culty. A big part, I believe, is the focus on new is better, right? That is what is ultimately American. We are the new world. You are the old world. So we're going to look at that, and I realized that a person with only 4 American history lessons maybe wasn't the right person to do that. So conveniently, someone on my team has a degree in American civilizations, and they are going to help put together, and they will be credited, a little explanation of some interesting stuff about American history that leads us to the 60s, when both the military and everything else gets, much more culty than before even. Okay, I said I would talk about book clubs, so I run 2 book clubs. One of them is a cult memoir book club. We read 12 memoirs in 12 weeks, in 12 months, and talk about it. I used to always tell people, when you're starting to deconstruct your cult experience, read 5 cult memoirs in a row, because then you'll start to understand, see the patterns and notice the trends, the tactics, techniques, procedures, as we say in military intelligence, that have been used on you in the past and can be indicators of danger in the future. Both of my book clubs are run through my Patreon. The links will be in the notes. For that, book club is at the $10 a month level. You get both book clubs for the price of one, because we also do a cult theory book club. This was the advanced class that the first Cult Memoir book club requested. I used to do these a year at a time. Now I'm doing them on kind of a rolling basis, so you can just join up and drop in whenever you want. In Cult Theory Book Club, in Cult Memoir Book Club, you got to go check it out. The whole list is there, but I don't think I can rattle off all 12. But in Cult Theory Book Club, we're reading Margaret Singer's Cults in Our Midst, Janja Lalich's Take Back Your Life, Alexandra Stein's Love, Terror, and Brainwashing, and Martha Stout's The Sociopath Next Door. We read a third of the book each month and then get together and talk about it. Very, very interesting and good discussions in both of these groups. So if you're interested in that, definitely check us out. And now let's talk about some tips for surviving your MAGA family members. I'm actually going to do like a whole 2-hour special on this on Wednesday before Thanksgiving on my TikTok and probably Instagram Live. So if you're not following me on those social medias, please come follow me. I'm also going to be teaching you how to do a crochet wig. And even if you have no crochet experience, you can like learn the skills that you need to do it in 10 minutes. And then it's just repetitive and it will be like really good practice. I'm going to focus on 3 tips, one of which is going to be deflecting, one of which is going to be engaging, and one of which is going to be dissociating. So stay tuned. Also a mantra you can speak to yourself to get through the holidays and some other important stuff. So come check us out. I will put the link here as well. And now for some nitpicking. First of all, I shall show off the Cruella scarf again, which I did not make this week, but it's just the one I'm wearing. So the scarf again is a thing that I invented where I take a scarf and cut it into pieces and make it a cardigan. And made this Cruella one because I often like to dress as Cruella for Halloween, but also just for fun. Okay. Made this dress, honestly, haven't tried it on yet. Don't know if I love it, but I took this thrift store top and I added a dress. It's not the nicest yarn and it feels a little clunky, so I'm going to see if I like it. We'll see if it shows up in videos. And finally, this one I know I love. These are my cult coats. I invented the first one after watching Taylor Swift's Karma, and I was like, ooh, I can knit something like that. This one is definitely going to be in the Culty Patterns book. Did this with a bunch of skeins of yarn. If you're the person that sent me this really fun yarn, look, and wait for it, earrings. I buy this junk jewelry and I got 2 discs that were perfect and I made these big fuzzy earrings and I worried that they were going to be too much, but I love it and I got so many compliments on all my fuzzies. You can do really fun things with yarn and make art out of clothes and make any kind of art, because making art is the other part of healing. I just realized now that I kind of stopped halfway through the healing thing. So, other than reading, a big part was writing my story. I thought I was fine. I had emergency therapy in the military when I needed it. Then I read my book and I was like, oh, this lady is not fine. And so I went and I got therapy. I could not train my therapist. And so I found a therapist from the Children of God that got what I needed and paid her out of pocket from the UK. And it was an excellent investment in my mental health. Also during this time, I got diagnosed with neurodiversity, started to understand myself better and my child and my whole neurospicy family. Got help with learning how to be a parent because we're like first generation parents when we're cult babies, basically. And really also figured out some good medications to help me with anxiety. Not to mention finding sort of my place and my niche in the world. And this is kind of the happiness, because the decade of deconstruction is really, really difficult. And it's been 13 years for me. But recently, having more and more markers of like, I'm mostly through it, right? Deconstruction never stops, healing never stops, learning never stops. But I spend more time now living in my happy life than I spend dealing with my trauma. And I've been able to make a business that I love, be an expert in something that is one of my special interest topics that I'm really good at being an expert in, perform, help people, and I'll do it all mostly from my house while knitting and reading and writing books. So I have heard from so many of you about how helpful this is, about how this gets you through things or helps you understand. And this is the whole point. I realize I can take all of my expertise in groups and bad guys and predators and use it to not help the groups, but to help individuals understand groups that have hurt you in the past are hurting you now and will probably try to hurt you in the future. I am Daniela Mestenek Young, author of Uncultured, former Captain Mestenek of the U.S. Army. Thanks for hanging out and have a day.